What's going on, everyone? We are back with our third, yes, count it, third Korvold Fae-Cursed King deck tech. Now, this one's a little special. This is the evolution, if you guys were here since the beginning of the channel. We originally were running Korvold with food. Now, I since scrapped the food tribal aspect of Korvold and instead built something a little more consistent. Goblins. Okay, so today we're going to be running through Korvold, the Goblin King, right? So we're going to be running through all the things that make him strong and all the combos that come with it. So without further ado, let's get into it. As per usual, if we're talking about commanders and stuff, we got to open with the commander himself, Korvold, the Fae-Cursed King. He is a 4/4 Dragon Noble for 2 generic, a black, a red, and a green. And he's flying. He also has an ability that whenever he enters the battlefield or attacks, you must sacrifice another permanent. That's a bad thing, but he has a secondary effect. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Korvold and draw a card. So he's comboing off of anything being sacrificed, because whenever a permanent sacrifice, he's getting bigger and we're gaining more card advantage. Goblins are going to be the fodder of choice, allowing us to sacrifice with some sneaky combos and kind of work our way through to buff Korvold or just knock out our opponent in directions that they weren't expecting. Alright, so without further ado, let's move on. So in this Korvold setup, we are running every goblin under the sun. And since we have access to green, red, and black, we have a bunch of different types of goblins, even some sneakier ones that you don't usually see. So opening up Ignoble Hierarch, you definitely want that. Cirque Prospector, you can sacrifice goblins for red mana. A Goblin Churgeon for 0 mana. So long as you sacrifice a goblin, you're able to regenerate another target creature. I'll pause for a second to talk about him. He's extremely useful, sacrificing a goblin to offer protection to Korvold. And in return, since we're sacrificing something, we're getting card advantage if Korvold's on the field. Now I have this Secret Lair Metallic Mimic dressed up like a goblin. When he enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and he's that chosen type. Also, from this point forward, whenever a creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield, it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Hold on to that, because he's going to be very important later with a combo that we'll talk about towards the end. So let me put him to the side. Goblin Recruiter allows us to stack the top of our library with goblins. Goblin War Marshal allows us to put goblin creature tokens, and we can echo him to do it again, or echo him so that we can get more goblins. Goblin Instigator, when he enters, you create a goblin. The Horde Master, other goblins get +1/+1, and whenever another goblin dies, you exile the top card of your library. If it was a creature, you may cast it until the end of turn. Putrid Goblin, it's a 2 mana, 2/2 goblin with Persist. Persist means if it died and it didn't have any -1/-1 counters on it, you return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 on it. This is another one of those key cards that we can just constantly sacrifice him again. I'll talk more about it. Let me put him to the side too, right? When we get to the end with the interesting combinations that we can get. So, Goblin Archaeomancer, reducing the cost of our red and green spells. Conspicuous Snoop allows us to play with the top card of our library revealed, and it has all abilities of any goblins off the top of our library. Grumgelly the Generous. All non-human creature tokens enter the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. So long as you control them, obviously. We're not buffing our opponent's side of the field. Goblin Sharpshooter doesn't untap on your untap step, but when a creature dies, you untap him. You can -1 to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. Mad Auntie is another anthem for our goblins, and we can tap it to regenerate a goblin that's about to die. Bogart Harbinger, let me move this over, here we go. Bogart Harbinger, when it comes into play, search your library for a goblin and put it on top of your library. A Goblin Matron. Search your library for a goblin, put it into your hand. Goblin King is our anthem, is another anthem. Or, excuse me, a Lord. There we go. Another Lord type effect. And it gives our goblins Mountain Walk, essentially spelling doom for our opponents that have mountains who are playing red. Gut, the True Soul Zealot. Whenever you attack, you may sacrifice another creature or an artifact. If you do, you make a skeleton with menace that's tapped and attacking as well. Just another sacrifice effect to have on the field. Another Lord in Hobgoblin Bandit Lord. Also, you can tap him to deal damage equal to the number of goblins that entered the battlefield under your control this turn to any target. A Goblin War Chief makes all of our goblins cheaper to cast and gives them haste. Krinko, not the one you're thinking of yet, but the Tin Street Kingpin. When he attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, then create a number of 1/1 goblin creature tokens equal to his power. So, very nice. Squee the King, right? The Dubious Monarch. He has haste, and when he attacks, you create another goblin that's tapped and attacking, and you may cast him from your graveyard by paying 4 mana and exiling 4 other cards from your graveyard, rather than paying his normal cost. So, really nice aspect to have. Goblin Chieftain's next. Let me just adjust the camera here. Give me 1 second. As I was saying with the Goblin Chieftain, he has haste, and other goblins get +1/+1 and also have haste. Pashik Mons. When he or another goblin you control dies, he deals 1 damage to any target. And for 4 mana, you can sacrifice a goblin to make 2 more goblins. We have another version of Squee, Mr. Immortal himself. He can be cast from the graveyard or exile. So we're going to be using him as sacrifice fodder and bringing him back. Zada, the Hedron Grinder. When you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only her, you copy that spell for each other creature you control and cast that spell on each of those targets. So, another one of those combo pieces that I'll set aside to talk about later. Goblin Thrashmaster. Other goblins you control get +1/+1, and if you sacrifice a goblin, you can destroy target artifact. The Warren Chief here has an interesting effect that whenever it attacks, you look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, put it into the battlefield tapped. If you didn't put that card on the battlefield, create a goblin. So, really nice thing to have. Siege Gang Lieutenants. This is a good one. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. You can also sacrifice a goblin to make the target opponent lose a life and you gain a life. Krinko the Mob Boss. You tap him, make goblins. Of course, you guys know the deal. Murderous Red Cap. When it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. It also has Persist. A Beetleback Chief. When it enters, you make 2 more goblins on the battlefield. This guy, the Goblin Dark Dwellers, when you cast it, you can cast an instant or sorcery card, so long as its converted mana cost is 3 or less from your graveyard. Scuzzleback Marauders allow Trample and Persist. Siege Gang Commander allows us to create 3 goblins, and we can sacrifice a goblin to deal 2 damage to a target player or creature. Wart the Raid Mother. When she enters the battlefield, you create 2 red and green Goblin Warrior creature tokens. Each red or green instant or sorcery spell has Conspire. So, meaning you can tap 2 untapped creatures you control that share a color with it, and it allows you to copy that spell. So, pretty useful to have her on the field. And we have certain spells that we are using for our quote-unquote removal, but we'll get to her later. The last guy, the most expensive card in the deck right now, is Muxus Goblin Grandee. When he enters the battlefield, you reveal the top 6 cards of your library, put all goblins with converted mana cost 5 or less from among them onto the battlefield, and the rest on the bottom of your library. Whenever it attacks, it gets +1/+1 until the end of turn for each other goblin you control. This guy pops off amazingly well, and for so cheap, considering most of our goblins themselves are actually pretty low mana cost, we're going to get a lot of things on the battlefield off of his trigger. Okay, now before we move on to our artifacts, our spells, and all that stuff, let's talk about the main finisher combo from this. So, talking about a finisher combo, check this out. We need something that buffs our creatures on the battlefield. Metallic Mimic in this example. We also need something with Persist. Putrid Goblin. And something that's a free sacrifice outlet. Siege Gang Commander. So what's happening here? Well, when Putrid Goblin enters the battlefield, he'll enter with a +1/+1 counter, thanks to Metallic Mimic. We use Siege Gang's effect to sacrifice him to pop your opponent for 1. Now, because he has Persist, he'll come back with a -1/-1 counter, right? Since he's entering with a -1/-1 counter, the Metallic Mimic will give it a +1/+1, right? Those two cancel out, essentially making him not have any counters on him anymore, because a -1/-1 counter and a +1/+1 counter cancel each other out. So meaning you can repeat this loop, killing your opponents, just killing the Putrid Goblin with the Siege Gang Lieutenant's effect. It'll come back thanks to Persist with a -1, but the Metallic Mimic will remove that -1, and we just repeat the cycle again. This is one of the main combos that we're running to wipe out our opponents, right? And bear in mind, every time we sacrifice something, our commander is allowing us to draw cards and getting bigger and scarier, potentially swinging out with commander damage lethal whenever we need it. That's one of the main creature combos that you want to keep an eye out for when you're running this deck. Let's move on to artifacts. We're not running too many artifacts. We got our Soul Ring, Wayfarer's Bauble, Golgari Signet, Arcane Signet, Cruel Signet. The last special one worth mentioning is Bolas' Citadel. Allows us to cast with life off the top of our library instead of land. But we tap it to sacrifice 10 non-land permanents, and each opponent just loses 10 life. We're going to have enough goblins to pay for Bolas' Citadel tap effect, so that's why we're running that. Let's move on to our enchantments. So our enchantments are actually pretty small too. Goblin Bombardment. This is like god tier card in the deck. Along with Impact Tremors, you guys know the deal here. We're running Bogart Shenanigans, which means every goblin that is put into the graveyard from play, it deals 1 damage to the target player. We also have Fable of the Mirror Breaker, one of the newer cards. The foil is really messing up the camera, but I'll read it to you guys. You can create a Goblin Shaman that whenever it attacks, you make a treasure token. Fantastic. Its second ability allows you to discard 2 cards. If you do, draw that many cards. And its third ability allows you to exile it and return it back as Kiki-Jiki, the Mirror Breaker, or whatever it is. Its effect is like normal Kiki-Jikis. I'll just read it out just in case. Right, reflection of Kiki-Jiki. Create a token that's a copy of another non-legendary creature you control. It gains haste and sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. A really nice thing, but the main reason I like it is it's part 1. Creating that shaman that makes treasures is just a fantastic addition. The last enchantment we're running, Outpost Siege. When it enters, we choose cons or dragons. Most times we are choosing dragons. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So more siphoning your opponent's life for removing cards. Let's move on to our spells. So here with the spells, we have 3 visits, Rampant Growth, Cultivate. Those are ways to help us get some land in the deck, right? We're also running Costly Plunder that allows us to get more card advantage. Same thing with Deadly Dispute. Next up, though, we're going to be running War and Warding, which allows us to force an opponent to sacrifice a creature. If a goblin was sacrificed this way, that player puts 2 goblin rogue creature tokens on the battlefield, and they gain haste until the end of turn. We usually use this on ourselves, but sometimes our opponent has something sneaky that we want to remove. That's what that's for. Krinkle's Command makes goblins. Dragon Fodder makes goblins. Now, this engine, yes, good. The remaining amount, the last one, Goblin War Party. makes goblins most times, right? We can also give our creatures +1 and haste it to the end of turn. We could entwine it though and do both, so just remember that. Now, the final part of this engine is how we're dealing with our opponent's stuff. We've been talking about all the things that we can do, but how do we stop our opponent from doing things? We're focusing on our opponent's creatures by taking control of them. So I'm talking hijack, threaten, besmirch, harness by force, mark of mutiny, and one of my favorites, Kari Zev's expertise. All of them do a very similar thing where we gain control of target creature for the turn, we untap it and give it haste. So it's really nice to use that, and then once we swing out with their own creature before our turn is over and they gain control of it again, we're sacrificing it with something like Goblin Bombardment to really make sure our opponent doesn't gain access to this again. Right, so really nice cards. I want to focus on this one specifically because it has an additional effect. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand for free when we cast this. So there's a lot of low-cost things that we can add that with. 2 more cards I forgot to mention. Hordling Outburst and Empty the Warrens for more goblins. That's just about it for the deck. Let's finish off with the lands. Our land base is actually pretty simple. We're rocking Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Unclaimed Territory, Path to Ancestry, Evolving Wilds, Rocky Tar Pit, Riveter's Overlook because we want to sacrifice it. Same thing with Terrapomorphic Expanse and Warped Landscape, as well as Blighted Woodland, right? Jund Panorama, and Myriad Landscape. All of these are like sacrifice lands to have us search for what we need, right? And extremely useful as our commander sees that and gives us card advantage. Savage lands, a refuge, right? Some dual lands, Tainted Woods, jungle, Den of the Bugbear because goblins, and finishing off with our basics: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mountains, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 swamps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 forests. That's the deck in a nutshell. Let's move on to closing thoughts. So we are flying through this deck tech. What can be said about Korvold? Well, the thing is, this is the 3rd Korvold deck on this channel. So you guys should be familiar with how amazing Korvold is. All you need to do is give him a proper sacrifice engine, and he's going to take off. The fact that goblins are so willing and able to kill themselves for your amusement is all the better. So that's why Korvold is an amazing commander for this deck. Just in case, because I know some tables actually don't like Korvold, I actually have a backup commander. If you guys ever have a situation where your party doesn't, or when your play group doesn't want you playing Korvold, a Shattergang Brothers is the same color identity as Korvold, and it runs a very similar aspect, allowing us to sacrifice creatures to force our opponents to do the same. Same thing with artifacts and enchantments. So if your opponent wants you to, or if your play group says no Korvolds at the table, or if you feel like they're going to focus you because you're running Korvold, break this guy out, right? He's an excellent alternative commander for the deck. Okay, so highly recommend Korvold. If you don't want to play goblins, that's fine, even though they're some of the cheapest to get. The thing is, you should have a Korvold. He is great, and most decks of whatever you want to play will benefit from having a Korvold if it matches his color identity. All right, thanks for checking us out, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll see you next time.